Hi Kirsten, I apologize for not having this video done sooner. I am now on day 12 of this migraine, trying to work through it. So today we're going to work on a watercolor calla lily. I looked up a photo on my phone. I will share that with you so you know kind of what I'm referencing as I'm painting, although I can't look at it while I'm painting, so I'm just going to have to be kind of by memory. But I drew very, very lightly. I don't know if you can see. Very almost not there, because when you use watercolors, sometimes the graphite and the watercolor will mix. I am using acrylic paper. I cut one sheet into two pieces so I can do two paintings. And then almost all acrylic papers that I've ever worked with have two sides. One side is really smooth and the other side has more of a texture. So if your paper is that way, choose the smoother side for this painting. You're going to need 2 cups of water. When you work with watercolor paints, you want a cup to clean your brush, and you're going to want a cup of clean water to add to your paints or to add to your paper. You're also going to need a couple sheets of paper towel to dry your brushes on, and of course your brushes and your paints. All right, let's get started. Here are my paints. I decided I wanted to do a violet calla lily. So I'm going to pull out my paint. Now when you're using watercolor, oh, I thought that might be removable. This is my first time using this set. When you're using watercolor, you need very, very little paint. And watercolor you can leave sitting on your palette, let it dry, and you can reactivate it with just a little bit of water. So don't ever clean your palette and throw it away. So I'm just going to put just a little tiny bit of violet in there. You really don't need very much. Hopefully you got a good look at that. Just a very teeny tiny bit. You don't use a whole lot of paint when you're doing watercolors. I'm also going to put down some ultramarine blue. You can use whatever colors you have that you like. It doesn't even have to be purple, although sometimes it's easier to find easier to follow a tutorial when you're using the exact same thing. So this one looks like it needs to be mixed a little. So once I get this cap off. So when I squeeze this one, you can see there's like some liquid at the top that's wanting to come out and it's not mixed in with the paint. So you just put the cap back on and just kind of knead the bottle to mix that in a little better. Surprised that happened with the beginning of this, but you know, there we go. And just a teeny tiny, if I can get it out, that was more than I needed, but that's okay. And then I'm going to get 2 different shades. Well, eventually we will get to the green if my head holds off, and I can, but we will need yellow for the flowers. So I'm just starting with the flower colors because I don't know how far I'm going to be able to make it into this tutorial. So you can also use watercolors that they sell them in the dried. They look kind of like a cake of paint. Whichever version you have is fine. Okay. And again, that's all more than I'll need, but like I said, you can leave this on the palette and let it dry, and you'll be absolutely fine to come back and use those later. You can just reactivate them with a little bit of water. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is pick a brush, and you're gonna want a round brush, kind of like this one, but I feel like, so this is a really easy way to test your brushes. Take it and just run it along where you want your brush stroke to be and see how it hits that. This one has kind of frayed ends on it, and I don't really want to worry about frayed ends. So this is a number 4, this is a number 6. They look very similar. I think this one might work better. All right, so pick which water is going to be your clean water. Keep track. If you end up putting a dirty brush in your clean water, you'll just need to dump it and get a fresh water. So we're going to get our brush wet. I'm just trying to make sure it's really worked into the bristles. And then we're going to start on the bottom portion of the flower. You're just going to take your brush with just water and run it along the edge of the flower. And I am working on just one little section at a time. So I'm just gonna fill in this section with water. And it doesn't have to be a ton, but you do want a fair amount. Once that's done, I'm going to go into my violet, and I'm just going to get just the tiniest little bit on the end of my brush. And I'm going to start at the bottom of the flower, which has the most color. And we're going to go back in. My hands are a little shaky today. So you'll see that adding the water allows that color to be pulled up into the rest of the petal. So you use less paint, and you can do shading and highlights all at the same time by watching how the paint spreads. And when you want it to be a lighter value, you're just going to spread that color a little more. If you want a highlight, like if I wanted this section to be a highlight, I can go right around that with my color and leave that as just paper, the color of the paper. And so then you'll get a natural highlight without having to do too much work. And then we're just going to keep adding color until you have the darkness where you want it, the depth of color. We don't want a hard line. In nature, there aren't a lot of hard lines. So what we're trying to do is kind of create a gradual color on this. And I really don't want to highlight there, so I am going to fill that in with some color. But you can see how that's now so much lighter than what's around it. So if this looks like you see a little bit of a sharp line, just keep going over it. Work it with your brush, add a little bit of color as you need it. And just very slowly, you're going to build up the foundation for the color in this flower. Now, it's very important to remember that watercolor paints spread very easily when there's a wet canvas or a wet surface. So you don't want to move on to something adjacent to this next because it's wet. So if you get another color, like if I start working on this part of this petal before this is dry, it'll all just blur together. So we're going to do one section at a time and then let that dry before you move on to the next section. And watercolor has just a lovely soft look to it. It's a very pretty look, I think. If your brush seems a little bit dry, oh, I just dipped that in clean water. Yeah, this still looks clean. You could always add a little water is what I was going to say before I interrupted myself. Okay, just along this section right here, I just want to add just a little bit more color, just a little, not too much. And then right here, I don't like this line, so I'm just gonna get a little more color. Really want the color to be deepest at the base of this petal and then along this edge right here where it meets the other petal. And then if you make the other petal lighter value there, it will make it look like it's in front of that. So we want to have enough color here to be able to do that without too much work on our end. So the less water you use, the more depth your color will have. So keep that in mind as you try to work this petal shape. I don't like that right there. And then if you're like, I have too much color, clean it in the dirty water, dry it off, get it wet in the clean, get a little color, and then you can keep working. I feel like my color just doesn't want to stick in that one spot, but I think it needs to, so we're just gonna keep adding. And you can do this as your piece dries too. If you see lines showing up where you don't want them, you can take your brush and just kind of take some of that water off, and it will help it dry a little bit quicker and maybe with a little less line. Now, I'm going to try to add a really deep base here. So I've dried off my brush on my paper towel. I'm going to go into my color, and I'm going to turn this upside down, and we're just going to take very carefully, because this is heavy duty color here, and just add it right at the base. So you can see how this color just kind of blends itself, which is really a nice feature of a watercolor. Makes it fun to work with. Just blowing on it gently to help it dry just a little bit. Going to clean my brush, dry it off. If when you dry it off on your paper towel you're seeing color, it's not clean, so go ahead and dip it again. All right, just trying to disperse some of that color. All right, so that petal, that section of that petal is done for now. Now with any painting really, you may come back to the same section over and over again and rework it, so just don't rush, be prepared for that. I do think I want to add just a little bit of blue, and my blue still had like that, whatever, it wasn't completely mixed. So I am going to mix it first, and then I'm going to clean my brush. And it had some blue in it, but I'm going right back into the paint, so I'm not too worried about that. And I'm just going to add just a touch and hope I don't regret it. Just kind of deepen that color for me, just a touch. You can see right there, it's spread a little. That's okay. We just want to help that along so it doesn't look like a mistake. All right, I like that. Clean. Well, dirty water, clean the brush. All right, so the top half of this is very, very pale. So I'm going to move up to basically this section here. In a calla lily, I know we drew a very simplified version, and it was a teardrop shaped. This one, because it's based on a real life picture, it has more of a wavy edge to it. So keep that in mind. And I am not going to take this water down too far because I don't want to work on the inside of the flower yet. I just want to work on this outer edge down maybe about halfway or so. So be careful when you put your water on. That's one of the most important steps, because if you take it too far, your painting is not going to look right. All right, so I'm going to start in the middle and work my way out, because we really don't want too much color here. Felt like I had too much color on the brush there, so I went ahead and took it off, cleaned my brush, and then go back in and just kind of work this color to where we want it. So I do feel like it's a little too dark, so I'm adding some water, cleaning my brush, taking that up and wiping it on the paper towel. You can also, this is a little more tricky because sometimes you take up more than you want, which is not the end of the world, but you can also just take a paper towel and just pat it dry. So that'll take off some of the color if you've got too much. And then you're gonna add some more water and really start spreading this around. And you can see I can blur that line fairly easily, not completely, especially over here where we've got such a hard line. So we'll go back and fix that later by adding more color. So I'm pulling down just basically water and a little bit of the color into the center of the flower. Now, I don't like this right here, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to get rid of it. So we're going to have to do some working with that. But you're just going to kind of take your brush and keep going over where there's a hard line that you don't want with some water. Try to spread that out a little bit. Now, I'm really trying to avoid the middle part that should be the little yellow stamen or whatever. You don't want to go into that area yet. Or at all, really, with the purple. Okay, so the center of the flower is going to be deeper than the outer edge. So we're going to add some color here. We're going to have a little bit of difficulty dividing these sections, so keep that in mind. We're going to have to show how the flower is shaped with color. So again, we're just going to keep going through and adding more color. Most flowers have a very deep color at the where it attaches to the stem, and then on the inside is deeper than on the outer edges of your petals. So if you just keep that in mind, we're just going to slowly adjust our color here to reflect that. I really don't like that line. See if we can blur that a little. So when watercolor dries, the outer edges of it dry first, which is what gives you the harder lines. Going into my blue now, because I think that's what's going to make this section separate from the other petal. And I'm going back into my purple. I did not clean my brush, which means that purple now has a little bit of blue in it. Keep that in mind. If that bothers you, start a new section on your palette where you mix the two colors together. This is why it's important to sketch it first so you know where your lines need to go. It's also important to remember how colors mix. So if I add that yellow part of the flower, if I do that right now while the blue and purple is wet, I will get brown, because purple plus yellow makes brown. We need less color, more water. Carry that up here. And you can see it's not like the water is a true eraser. It helps, but it's not going to completely eliminate what you've already put down. So keep that in mind. Keep working on your flower shape. All right, I'm not minding this too much. I feel like this is looking okay. I'm just trying to add a very thin line of purple on the outside edge and hoping that it will lightly bleed in and blend on its own. All right, I'm gonna let that dry for a minute. I'm gonna get some fresh water because my cleaning cup is looking dirty. And then we're gonna add this little part here, and then we'll move on to green. All right, Kirsten, one other quick tip for you. As you're working on your piece, and if you wanna know if it's dry, hold it at an angle to the light, and you can tell because it'll be more shiny where it's still wet. So mine looks fairly dry. I'm going right back into the violet. This time I want it to be pretty deep. gonna fill in right here. And I didn't put my water down first, so you'll get a much deeper color when you do that, and it won't spread as well. So I'm gonna clean out my brush and just add water now. See if we can't remedy that faulty thinking there. Just put the water on first for this assignment. There are times when you don't want to do it that way, but for this particular one, I think it's better if we put the water in first and then add the color to that. So you can see it's not terrible to try to fix it if you forget. All right, I'll let that dry. And so the leaf that I drew in, I just drew kind of what I wanted it to look like, not what was real. So I am going to fix this here because this should be the rest of this curved. I don't know if we're going to be able to fix that. So we kind of have this where it's curved out, the petal itself. Hopefully you'll see that in the picture. That's getting there. So let's see what we can do to help this along. So this needs to be deepened here. Now remember, I just put water over there, so I've got to be careful here what I do. I'm gonna let that dry a little more. And let's pull out some green. I am going to pull out my darker green, which is called Viridian Hue. I feel like we're having quite a bit of success using just one color, so let's stick with that for now. All right. Okay. Going into my clean water. Gonna pick up some green. Remember, always rotate your piece to make it easiest for you to paint. And when I drew in my stem, I only drew in one line. I didn't draw how wide I want it because you can do that with your brush. So if you've drawn 2 lines, erase the second one. So stems, let me check this petal and make sure it's dry. It is, okay. Stems are fatter at the base where it meets the flower. I could tell already I don't really care for this green color. And I forgot to put my white down, or my water down again. So let's try this again. I'm gonna add some water there. And then we'll just, it's a very pretty green, but it just doesn't say stem to me. So I might switch over to the other color. Okay, so it starts out fat and then it gets narrow. And I am going to let that dry before I try to add a different color. So the color that I'm going to add that I think is going to work better is sap green. And maybe we'll go back to working a little bit on the petal there while we let the green base there dry. Oh, come on. All right, this one has the same thing as one of the other colors. It needs to be mixed a little better. So I'm just gonna knead it, bottom to top. You don't want to squeeze too hard because it will force some of the paint out like I did on the blue. But you do want to mix that in a little bit. Much better. Okay. So pick up some water. Just checking to see what's wet and what's dry. And I'm going to do inside the flower where this curved petal is. And I'm going to go back into the purple. And we're just going to add a line of it. Oh, I just cleaned in the wrong water. Let's try trying to blend this just a little bit more. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry. And the green is just about dry. I'm gonna go get some fresh, clean water and I'll be right back. All right, Kirsten, my head is starting to act up, so I'm gonna do some little touches just to kind of give you an idea, and then you'll need to carry yours further than I carried mine. I want this line here to be a little bit harder, so no water on my brush, or very little. And then really define that edge there. And now I'm going to get just a teeny tiny bit of water, touch it to the paper towel so that it doesn't carry too much. This edge here is not the way I'd want it. It looks bumpy, which could be because my hand was shaky, but. And then I'm going to do a mostly dry brush, go back into my purple, and I want to add a more defined edge here, because it's not really supposed to be curling around, and that because of the way the paint dried, it does look like it curled. That's not what I want. Just blending. I've got too much water. Come back in and pull some of that off. See how nice that works. For the most part, it's not perfect, but okay. Dry brush again. Going back into my violet, and let's add a more defined line there. Like I said, the base of this flower is going to be nice and deep. Going into my clean water so I can do more blending. All right, I'm liking that. I think I'm going to go with a dry brush again into the purple. Let's see if we can't clean this up just a little bit. Light touch here, very light touch, and make sure you've always got enough paint. If you're running your brush along and you just don't have the paint that you need, if you're having to kind of force it, reapply the paint to your brush. So we can do a really, really defined line there that shows that this is a curve outward. So go ahead and feel free to add those throughout. I don't want the whole flower outlined. That's not what we're looking for. But to add just some little, my brush is too dry. If your bristles are just not wanting to flow across the paper, add a little water. Too much water now. Which is why you always have your paper towel standing by. And then blend it in. Need a little more water to kind of soften this edge here. So water is a great blending tool. A dry brush is going to give you some nice, very defined lines. So I'm like not deciding where I want this to go. Let's do right here. If I can get my hand to stop shaking so much, that would be helpful. It's a little too dry. Just barely in the water, touch it to the paper towel so you get the excess off, because otherwise you're going to get a nice thick line, and that's not really what I'm looking for here. Okay. So I want you to keep doing that. Keep building your colors, keep building your lines. This definitely needs some more color in it, but not, I don't want to lose that hard line that I put in. So notice I'm not going all the way up to that, but just close. And this is turning into one shade of purple and this little rolled here. And that's not what we want. It should have more of a highlight where it's rolling, which is right here. And then it should get darker towards the outside edge. So now I'm going to go along that outside edge add some color. And you want to blend it up into where it's rolled, but not all the way. But you do want it to look, you don't want a hard line here, okay? So darker on the outside. And then I should have left this just paper white, but I didn't. So we'll just work with it. All right, let's move on to the green before my head is not able to paint anymore. Get some clean water on. We're going to add some water to this section that we already painted because I do want to add some green to that. And then I'm going to take my brush and just with water, put in a thin line, and you don't want it straight, it needs to be curved. I'm going back into my water and then into my paint. And we'll get some lovely green tones here. And so you can see that that just naturally wants to take that right down to where you've put the water. I do feel like for mine, I'm having some issues with the thickness. My brush was too wide. So I'm intentionally not carrying this all the way down. I'm just gonna scoop up some of that water and some of that color and see if we can't make this a little more graceful. Okay, so now I do have a pencil line showing where I kind of drew the stem, but it didn't end up there. Now, you don't want an eraser to touch wet watercolor, it will do bad things. But I will try to erase the pencil line as I'm able. So that was why the drawing portion is really important, because it will show up. So now I'm going to go back into my sap green with a dry brush. And we're just going to come along this edge. And that should give it a little more definition as far as shading. So you'll see we have a light side and a darker side. But I feel like that needs to be blended just a little bit. So I'm going to go back through with, I didn't get more paint, I just got more water, and just blend that just a little bit. Now, I think I would prefer a hard line all the way down, but I'm not going to try to put that in right now because I don't think that will look right until we get everything else finished. So remember, the base is going to be very shaded, very dark, so you're going to want to add a lot of color up at this is where the bud would have been originally. This bud, the flower comes out of the bud, so it's very dark. There, I like that. Okay. All right, so that's the basics for the flower. Please keep building yours up further than I did mine. Like I said, my head's being a pain, literally. I am going to, maybe not with that brush. Yeah, not that one. I am going to do just a quick little bit on the leaf for you. And I'm going to start at the top, just so I don't accidentally hit that stem. So this is a flat brush, so you have to kind of load it differently, and I don't know if this is in frame or not. So with my round brush, I just kind of twirled it. You're going to load one side, load the other side, and just keep going back and forth and work that paint into those bristles. So with your angled brush, you're going to start at the top. I forgot to put my water down. This would work better if you'd put water down. See, if I had put my water down, this would be spreading already and I wouldn't have to go back and try to blend and all of that. So don't forget to do the water first. And you want to work on smaller areas at once, because if I go this whole leaf and I let this dry, I'm not gonna be able to blend it. So keep that in mind too. I'm not doing things like I should. Although if you have your water down, that's gonna take care of this problem anyways. So hopefully you put your water down first, and then you don't have to go back and correct any little mistakes that you have. All right, that's actually going fairly well. I'm just re-wetting my brush in the clean water, which will probably have a little bit of green in it now, but I'm just about done, so I won't worry about that too much. So the leaf that we did in our simplified drawing, it was very unlike any leaves that I saw in the pictures when I Googled calla lily. So that's why this leaf is going to look very different to you than what we drew before. So just in case you're wondering why the long, crazy looking leaf, that's why. All right, let's add a little color to that. Oh, that's going much better. So I don't want to finalize the stem because it's going to blend a little bit with the leaf. So let's get the leaf done first, and then we'll add all the details of the stem. Some hard lines with a dry brush and that type of thing. All right. I don't know that I, in my head, picked out where the sun was in this. So I feel like I'm trying to remember that now. And so you can see that by adding this, I've made kind of what looks like a folded leaf. Well, these leaves are very flat. A calla lily leaf, an iris leaf, they're very flat. I don't want it to appear to be a curve, like a rolled portion of the leaf. So now you're just gonna go back and you're going to get a little paint, a little water, and let's blend that. Especially right there. I didn't need that hard line. So you can see I'm still getting kind of a gradient of colors. It's not all one color on the leaf because I can add dimension by adding more color or less color. This part's really hard where you have one object crossing over another. That can be kind of difficult, so take your time. We'll add the defined lines between them later. So basically right now we're just trying to get the shape of it, trying to add some detail to it. Some little lines where it gets darker. This line here is really sloppy, so I'm gonna see if I can clean like this outside edge. Let's clean that up a little bit. I don't know if you could see that, but my bristles were starting to kind of separate. If they're doing that, your brush is too dry. Definitely need to add some water. Okay. And it's really important that as you go to the other side of your leaf, the colors need to match. The color on this side of the leaf and this side of the leaf, and the strokes really need to match, so you have that feeling of this is one thing. This is not, you know, half on one side and the other. You know, it's got to look like a continuous thing. So as you work on one side, then go back through and do the other side the same way, and you'll have a much nicer finished product. So really watch for that. Either side of that should look very similar. So for this leaf, you could add yellow, you could add the darker green. Let me add some of that just to show you. Oh, I do have yellow out, so I could do that as well. So remember, the more water you have, the more it's gonna blend. So I really don't like this green, I gotta say. So let's clean that out. I hope you have better greens than I do. I think that one is too blue. So you could add a little yellow to it to kind of even the tone out. See how I did that? It took that same color right over the other side. Yeah, I don't like what that did. But just like we've talked about before, everything in nature is multi-toned, multifaceted. You're not going to have one color of green on a leaf. It just doesn't happen. So keep adding other colors, build it up, build it up, build it up. Watercolor can be a long process because of that, because it takes layering, it takes a lot of work to get to what the finished product should be. So I'm going to go back into the green. This, I feel like it just kind of went a little bit paler than I want. So now it's too dark. There we go, that's better. And then we've got this very hard line right here that I don't like. So I just wanted to clean that up a little bit. And then I'm trying to stick to this side here, which is where I made it darker, to add my color in. See, I'm kind of blending it all the way into that leaf, so we will add some defining lines. All right, so let's go back into the sap green with a dry brush. And then I think I am going to add some yellow into this stem. I'll mix my yellow. I had some craziness going on there. Okay. Let's see how vibrant this yellow is. Because you don't want it to be overpowering, but I do want to add a lighter side. Okay, so now on the leaf, we can add some very fine dark green lines. Ooh, that's too dry. I was trying to do a dry brush, but that was so dry that it just came out in clumps. We don't want that. All right, so just get a little bit of paint. And you don't want it to look like a stripe, but more like this line has, or this leaf has texture to it. I put way too much paint and not enough water there. So keep working on that. Add some definition, add some details to it. I'm gonna let that be for now. I would probably add pen work to the stem just to define it better, although with the overall style of the painting, I feel like that doesn't really go. Okay. Let's go ahead and add the stamen. It should be fairly simple. I'm not adding water to this because I don't need this to spread. I don't need it to blend. It can be almost the same shade of yellow across the whole thing. So I will put the yellow on, and then I'm just going to take my brush and push it down, and lift it up. And that will give it, hopefully, a little bit of difference in the values on it. Push it down, lift it up, see how it added like a highlight there? I'm gonna call that good. All right, so the flower, keep working that. I do have white watercolor paints. I have never used white watercolor paints. I don't imagine they work all that well. So if you have that and you want to experiment with it, you can, but just keep in mind white watercolor, not really going to do exactly what it would with acrylic. Acrylic is very different. So I know what I was going to do. I was going to add some lines. All right, so I'm going to go back into the violet, very little, almost no water. And we're just going to keep adding detail lines. That's good. I think I want just a tiny bit of water, not too much. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Just add, my brush stroke is a bit wide there. So go in with our eraser, our water eraser, and blend that. And I'm just going to get a little more color so we can blend that just a little bit better. There we go. Okay, let's do the same thing on this outer edge. Too much water. All right, so hopefully that gives you a decent idea. And then you can add, I'm running out of dry paper towel. You can add some fine lines. Like so. Add some shading. If your brush has too much color and not enough water, clean it, add water. Make sure you're adding the clean water, not the dirty. And then just keep blending it, keep working it, keep creating this illusion of a flower on a piece of paper, because that's what we're after. I'm gonna go back to a dry brush because I'd really like to have this line fixed. That's a little too dry. So a lot of art is about experimenting and learning the feel of the medium. So knowing when my brush is too dry or too wet is just something that happens with practice. So if you feel like you're not getting the hang of it, keep practicing. You're probably tired of hearing me say that. Some clean water and blend this. Add a little paint to my brush to really get some blending going here. And I just used my clean water as dirty water, that's okay. Okay, so I think you get the idea. This section over here could really use some more work, so I'll watch for that on yours. This should be more shaded, and I've got too much water, so I'm gonna clean that off and go back into my paint. I like the hard line that I've got there, but this needs more depth, and I'm not gonna get that without adding color. So I added a little too much up there. You can also take your finger, only press it down once. Don't do a tap tap, because that'll really mess you up, but it'll pull off a little bit. And I feel like where I added the blue, I'm just not liking the look of that. Shiloh. And the crazy puppers has come downstairs. Isabel, I'm making a video. Can you take her outside, please? So again, pulling that color up, 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 and then adding some water to blend that edge. Okay. I keep saying I'm gonna stop and then I just keep going, don't I? And I actually kind of like what I just did there. That almost looks like a shadow. So I'm going to leave that. I'm just going to soften it up just a little bit. Or not. As I'm fiddling with it, I'm liking it less and less. So I'll just blend it in. No worries. All right, I think... So you're just going to keep looking and going, okay, how do I make this look more realistic? Or more finished even. So maybe we're not looking for a realistic calla lily, but we are looking for a finished piece, a finished painting. So watch for all the little details. Those are really, really important. Make sure you really take your time on this. I'm getting through it pretty quickly because I have to because of my head, but please, please, please take a lot of time on this and create something that you can be super proud of, that is immediately recognizable to anyone who knows a calla lily as a calla lily. All right, so I do want to, let me just do that. I want, with my dry brush, I'm going back into my sap green because I want to add a hard line for this edge of this stem. I'm having a really hard time with this. Okay, that's better. So the line, when you're adding these fine lines, they don't have to be exactly the same. Like if you have a thicker spot and then a thinner spot, that's okay, as long as they flow together. So don't worry too much about how thick your line is. Worry about, does it look, maybe not, don't worry at all because it's art, so you shouldn't be worried, but you know, does it look cohesive? Does it look like it belongs? Okay. So I would like to do the same thing on the leaf, but I really do have to stop. My head's getting worse. So keep adding these little details, these fine lines, the deep colors with the light colors, the water to blend. And I really look forward to seeing your finished product. Hopefully you will be just as happy with it as you can possibly be, because that's the goal, is to create something that you're happy with, that you love. So keep working at it until it's that, and I can't wait to see it. Talk to you later, Kirsten. All right, Kirsten, I forgot about one last part that I wanted to do. So with a wet brush, you're gonna pick up some of the purple. It can be pretty watery. And then with the handle of the other brush, and normally I would take a little piece of scrap paper and cover my flower, but I'm not gonna worry about that this time. And you're just going to tap it. There we go. And now you've got some fun little splatters. You could do the same thing with the green, although I prefer just the brighter colors myself. So just a little fun extra bit you can add.